Hi, I'm Guy Loving, and I'm with
Joe Tolles.
Joe. You and I have talked on several occasions, but I'm just kind of curious into knowing how did you first know, how were you introduced to adoption?
Well, my story is a long and convoluted one, but I grew up in foster care. So I was around foster care and adoption issues my entire life. I went into foster care at birth and aged out at 21. So without ever being adopted. But in the home, there were kids that were coming in and out. Um, I was one of those, and there were six core children, which I refer to us as the six children, two of the biological children and four foster children that stayed there for their entire lives. And I actually ended up in this one home when I was 8 months old after being placed into previous homes. In addition to that, I grew up and worked in foster care and adoption and was a supervisor for a foster care agency.
For me, I worked at a residential treatment center, and I was around children who wanted to be adopted, and that's how I met my son. He wanted to be adopted.
Okay, so when you got involved in this, what were some of your fears about adoption?
Well, I was a parent already, and I'd been through raising a kid, so I wasn't ready to do it again.
Hmm.
After being on that roller coaster once, you're kind of apprehensive about getting back on it. But my son was such an amazing kid, and so I decided to do it.
I had been working in child care and social services for such a long time and had thought about it for a very, very long time. I actually did home studies where I went in and collected information. Never thought I could afford it, never thought I was going to be ready enough. It was just one of those things that just got pushed off. And then one day I woke up and I just dove into the idea and, contacted You Gotta Believe. And, the rest is history. 4 kids later and working on number 5.
Being a single parent and a single dad, we have a lot of concerns. Let's talk about some of them.
Well, I my biggest concern is being enough. You know very well. You're a single parent. I've got 4. I'm a single parent of 4 boys right now, and again thinking about number 5 coming in. So the real issue is how can I meet their needs because I have a real sense of wanting to take them into manhood. But it's hard.
Yeah.
And I just hope that that's my biggest single fear. And then I guess a secondary fear is losing, not being able to be successful or losing them, because you can only do so much. I still have to work. I still have to do everything else to keep a house together. And they're going in 4 different directions, soon to be 5, and I can't chase them around as I get older.
And I have the one that it's hard for me to chase him around, so I know exactly how you feel, And then, being a single father, it has your social life changes a lot, But on the other hand, the rewards of it tends to balance out.
Yeah, I think that's true. After adopting, what were some of the challenges that you had to face?
Uh, just the adoption itself, where there were a lot of challenges because my son was not an American citizen.
Oh, okay.
So we had to, the agency that he was with had never taken care of his immigration situation. And so we had to go through hoops in trying to get him to become a citizen. Or not even a citizen. He had to get a green card and just become a legal alien, so that was difficult. And then afterwards, it was just, I guess it was just becoming adjusted to the actual paperwork because we had already morally adopted each other. I had already been his dad, and and he'd been my son. That was moral, but the paperwork stuff got difficult. But then it was over. It was just trying to see where, changing the names and changing documents and all the legal stuff. That's basically where the problem lied. But emotionally, we were where we were from the beginning.
Yeah, I found that to be true for myself too. That with outside of all the bureaucracy, it's easy sort of to connect to. It was easy for me to connect to my boys, but the process, like you mentioned about the particulars, you have special needs. I have two kids with special needs, and the agencies that were working with him hadn't looked, hadn't discovered, never informed. So I had to learn a lot to be able to meet his needs. It would not have changed my mind, but knowing that information up front would have helped me prepare better. So I have a son who, needed to go through special training classes and Social Security and all of those other bureaucracies that sort of don't come quickly. And nobody really gives you any information about it. So I had to be more educated about what it is that I needed to do to be able to help him in the way that I need to.
Yeah, the education process with children that are in foster care is just so, how can I say, disturbed. It's disturbing. My son went to school at a residential treatment center, and he graduated from high school there. But he was on, 3 kids graduated with him. And he would not have graduated, but I got involved in the process. I went to school. I called the teachers every day. There were some behavioral problems that needed to be addressed so that he could absorb the work. He had some cognitive problems, but it was nothing that he couldn't get a diploma, which he did. Mm-hmm. But it took a parent to be involved, because him just being there, it wasn't going to happen. So I understand exactly what you're saying, because they tend to ignore those challenges. So, and you not knowing, they were ignored.
Well, absolutely ignored, and I guess some of that's understandable because they're going from like one anthill where there are lots of ants, mm-hmm. and then they pull the one ant out of that anthill. They haven't addressed those issues because they're worrying about keeping the mound together, and then unfortunately, it seems that sometimes that stuff gets dumped on the parent who's about to engage in this process, and nobody really knows because they never paid attention to that one ant, to use that analogy.
That's an excellent analogy. What about your family? How did they feel about adoption?
Well, that was easy for me because my family is, again, I grew up in foster care, so I didn't have the traditional family. I wasn't married, so that wasn't an issue. I lived most of my adulthood alone. So
extended family, maybe friends.
Yeah, friends. People know that I'm going to do what I want to do, and maybe some of the skills that I have developed or coping mechanisms came from being in foster care and adoption. So I had a different understanding. I think the people that knew me, people that I consider my family, respected that they didn't know and that I must know, even though there was some apprehension. Everybody, when you talk about this, like, really? like this is something miraculous, but it is what it is. And so I didn't really have a lot of pushback or anybody to give me their opinion because I'm a lone wolf, as one of my sons likes to say.
And listening to what you said, doing what you're going to do what you want to do. My immediate family, what happens is that, I basically, the majority of my family is African American, and in the Southern African American, there were so many people that were cousins and things that weren't really, that we never knew. Things came out older that people were adopted or someone was left by somebody else in our family. We never knew, and we always accepted everyone. So they basically didn't have a problem. My extended family was happy about it at first, but then when they saw the challenges that I was having with some of the challenges, then they became negative, and then I had to realize that I can't have them involved in this part because they're making it difficult for me.
So what are some of the things that you learned about yourself through the adoption process? Because I found that there was a lot of lessons that I learned, needed to learn, and still need to learn.
Yeah, I see that I have more resilience than I thought. I'm a lot more patient than I thought. I find I saw a lot of my vulnerabilities. You know, you know, I wanted to be accepted so much by my son that, sometimes I ignored behaviors. And so I had to realize that you can't do that. Things that I would never accept from my biological son, I started to accept from him. And then I realized that that's not being a parent. I can't make up for the past or some of the pain that he felt, me excusing behavior based on what he'd been through rather than addressing it. So I went in another direction, and it worked. So that was one of the...
Yeah, and I guess the things that I learned is that I'm not so much of a lone wolf, because I really have to either physically or emotionally gather the troops to help me go through some of the things that typical teens bring to the table. So, I learned I'm not as tough as I thought I was. It's easy to be tough when you don't have to answer to anybody. But so I learned that to compromise in your household. All of the stuff that I could counsel people for before I had kids in my house was real easy. I had all the answers, but nobody told me that every once in a while it feels like you wake up in the morning and get punched in the gut. And then I tell people, and they're like, "Oh, that's so silly. That's exactly what it's supposed to be like. That you're not any different from anybody else." So I found that I'm more alike to people that I respect, or at least respect their opinion. But I also found out that I need more from people than I thought that I did.
Take a moment to imagine your life without family, without parental guidance or loved ones to call when you need advice, a helping hand, or just a hug. Yet thousands of children are faced with this prospect every year as they approach the end of their time in foster care. You Gotta Believe is the only organization in New York City that focuses on finding lifetime families for young adults, teens, and preteens before they end their time in foster care and run the extremely high risk of winding up homeless or worse. To find out how to become a permanent family to a youth in care, contact our offices at 718-372-3003 or visit our website at yougottabelieve.org, because we believe it's never too late for family.
Hi, I'm Joe Tolles, and here with Guy Loving, and we've been talking about our experience in adoption and foster care. And we've been talking about some of the challenges, but it's not all bad. And so, what are some of the fun things that have happened during this process? Because I know I have laughed a lot since my kids have come into my household. So, what do you have to say about that?
Oh, we laugh a lot. We spent, when he was younger, we spent a lot of time together. So I've seen every superhero film from Spider-Man to X-Men and all of that stuff. He likes to go to restaurants, so we go out into restaurants and amusement parks and just watching at-home conversations and comedic things. We have a lot of fun together.
That's my excuse to go and watch. There's movies that I like to see. I forget about all of those Marvel movies I get to see, and typically if I didn't have anybody to go, I go by myself. But I get to see the animated cartoon movies that typically if I went by myself and there's a room full of kids and parents, they're wondering what's my issue. So they bring that to me, and we've been able to travel. We've been able to, one of the things I like to do is I like to travel. And I really have a great sense of making kids understand that the world belongs to them. So fortunately, we've been able to go on cruises and to Disney, places that they have never been before. And forget it being tiring to me, because then I've got 4 kids wanting to do 4 different things. But the fun part really is to watch their eyes open and belong, be comfortable. And so I can't. What I tell people typically is, I don't really remember what it was like without them. So it's hard to go back. I know I was comfortable by myself, but I would not have had as much fun watching them grow and develop. And it's not all great, but it is fun watching them sort of grow up. If I could just get them to grow up a little faster, then life would be great. But that each person takes their own time.
When did you first realize how important it was for your son to have a father?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's important for boys to have a father. A man can only bring a son into manhood. So I grew up in foster care, like I talked, and my parents got divorced. So it was really, the formative years of my life was just my foster mother. And she couldn't do what she needed to do. She couldn't teach me the lessons. She couldn't have those conversations that sort of kept me on the right path. So it's always been part of me because I've always gravitated. I was an athlete, so my coaches, my teachers were all part of my process of going into manhood. And so, I work with kids, as do you. We see it every day that, kids need a man to direct them, or they'll go off any way they want to. Geez, talking about cartoons, Disney movies are all about that.
Yeah.
They all need a father. So my kids have all up until now were freed for adoption. They wanted a father. They verbalized that. And like you said earlier, I had a need to be wanted. They chose me. So we chose each other. But I think it's an important part of the process, and it's not. They'll push back, which is what they're supposed to do, and sometimes that doesn't feel as great, but it is part of the process.
It's kind of like the alpha male thing,
Exactly.
And when I think about my relationship with my son, it's very similar to what you're saying, and I remember they want direction, because I remember saying that he couldn't go to a party. Because I didn't have enough information.
Right.
And I heard him talking to his friends on the phone. He was mad because he couldn't go to the party, but it sounded as though he was bragging that I told him that he couldn't go. And that's when I realized, I was like, wow, he wanted to be parented. He wanted a father. He wanted someone to say that I care enough about you that this is not enough information. I need more for me to give you my permission to go.
I have a similar story. I drove one of my kids to a party. And the house was jumping, and the kids were walking up with beer, and I said, "I'm sorry, I'm not dropping you off here." And I couldn't believe that he didn't fight. He's like, "Okay." So I feel the same. That those moments are far few in between, but you get those moments all the time. I also know that my kids, I know that they value me in the hardest times when they have a friend who's in need, and they say, "Dad, you need to talk to him. You need to talk to her. They need your help." So there's some appreciation for that.
That happens to me all the time too. My son someone that's in trouble, they'll show up at my door. This person is having a problem. Can you do this? Can you call? Can you? I can solve everything, and it's a good feeling. And then I try to. I try to.
How did you know when your son was your son? I mean, there's a different twist on that question. Is how do you know when that was your son?
Well, when my supervisor first approached me and said that one of the kids in the cottage that you work in would like for you to be their parent. And I said, I'm not going to do this because I've been a parent already and I'm ready to retire and I'm looking forward to moving on to the next phase of my life. I said, but then they told me who it was, and I said, oh, I like him so much. So I said, I'm not going to, I don't want you to tell him no. I will break it to him gently. Let me take him out to breakfast. So I took him out to breakfast, and we had a good time, and he was so happy that I couldn't. Then I took him to buy something. I figured I'd buy him a pair of sneakers and then tell him I couldn't do it to break it. He was so happy about the sneakers, and I felt so good about it that I wound up taking him back. When I went to work on Monday, my supervisor said, well, did you tell him? And I said, no. And she said, well, I knew that you probably couldn't. I said, but I can. I said, I'm going to tell him this Saturday. This Saturday, we're going to spend the whole day together, and then I'll tell him at the end of the day, and then I'll bring him back. So I took him that Saturday, and we had such a good time. And then I realized, I said, everything I'm doing with him and the feelings that I'm having is the same ones I had with my biological son. So that's when I knew that that was my son.
And I guess, you know, those early signs, I always question those early signs, and that may be a part of my upbringing. But when they exhale, when they smile, when they laugh, when they want to be around you, were real signs that, you know, they were comfortable. They all, surprisingly enough, called me dad. Like, I don't remember them ever calling me anything else.
Yes.
So they all called me dad fairly quickly. But that's just a word. Being a dad and being bonded was through the sort of the emotional things that of, you know, can I help you every once in a while.
You've messed up your son's haircut.
Mom?
Do you A, try to fix it,
Like it never happened.
B, work with what you got, or C, show solidarity?
Thank you, baby.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
Why do you think we need more fathers to commit to adopting sons?
Well, it's, you know, especially in the African American community, and when I just take a look at some of the situations that the young men are in, that we see that, you know, with the police and being killed, and you look at some of their situations, and you see the moms and you see these situations, and then you wonder, where's the dad? And who is counseling these young men on how to be a man and dealing with these situations? Because when you're approached by the police, which I talk to my sons about all the time, is how when you're approached by the police, how to always remain calm, how to always do exactly what they ask you to do without any resistance, and to, you know, there's things that we have to say. And when I look at this situation, there's so many young men that are out there that they're not getting this guidance. And this is a lifesaver. And I'm not trying to get on a soapbox and talk about
Get on
the
box.
political atmosphere, but fathers can be a lifesaver in these situations. You know, if you've got a dad that's active and telling you how to be a man of color in this society, and I'm not going to even say, because it's not only black men, it's the Latino men that have the same situation. And so, and it's biracial men that have the same situation. So I basically feel that having a father who's lived it, who's survived it, because we're basically survivors, and we've survived it, that we can pass on this information. It's very important that all young men get this information. So the young men that are in foster care, that don't have this guidance, we need to find fathers or mentors for them that can provide it.
I also think from experience, growing up my entire life in foster care, there's a great need to belong. Luckily for me, I was able to connect to coaches and teachers. Not all coaches and teachers have that ability. But it goes back to what I said about how it takes a man to lead a boy into manhood. They're out there. They're unattached. They're scared. They're lonely. They're confused. And I'm talking about all the feelings that I had. And one of the things I like doing is I like talking about my experience in foster care. and hopefully as an example of hope, because look at me. I am from the system. Every day of my life, for 21 years, I was a foster child. I will always be a foster child. This is what can result if somebody takes the time to pay attention to you. I had people who pay attention to me. I think that I feel very strong about paying attention to kids in general. But I work real hard for kids that are in care or disenfranchised to try to teach them that no matter how bad it is, there is somebody who cried before you, somebody who suffered for you, before you, but you know what? You're looking at somebody who survived before you, and you can survive as well.
Yeah.
And those are long, drawn-out lessons, but I think they're important lessons, and I think it's important to balance out, you talk about the political climate, to balance out the system, because I think you can easily be lost in the messages that we see in the news and in our communities every day about how little worth we really have. We need to reverse that. The only way to reverse that is for the people that are older and need to step up and be leaders and talk about purpose, talk about pride, talk about abilities, talk about hope. So I got up on the soapbox too, but I feel very strongly about that.
But it's just amazing. What you're saying is amazing, and your story is amazing. And in keeping in line with that, you know, what are some of the most important things that you instill in your boys?
Well, the most important thing I try to instill in them is identity. It's easy, I think, in general, for anybody in this world today. It's so crazy and so full of mixed messages to not know who you are and where you stand. Part of that traveling, part of that being in situations that you wouldn't be necessarily in, to understand that I belong here. I can do this. I would love for those lessons to be immediate, because once you're comfortable in your own skin, you can be anywhere. Obviously, our kids come to us with different issues, and the process is different. And the best I can hope for is that I started them down the road to be comfortable in their own skin. I belong. I have an identity. This is who I am. And I'll take good, bad, or indifferent, but this is who I am. I want them to own it. I have the capability in my house to be able to say, I don't want to hear that nonsense. I don't want to hear the pity party. Everybody in this house came from the same place, including me. So that sort of may give me an advantage to be able to say, I don't really care. Dry your eyes. Let's move on.
Yes.
But we all need to be able to say that. You know, the only way that society really ever deals with adoption or foster care in a positive way is if you have a super power. Batman, Robin, Green, you know, all these superheroes, Harry Potter, they're all bigger than life. But the reality is they look like us. They look like the kids.
Yeah.
They don't have superpowers. And so we have to instill sort of some of those internal superpowers. And I think the best power for everybody to have is self-worth.